Hi everyone, my name is Mitch Hansen, and as an introduction, I'm the marketing manager for AquiSense Technologies, a local manufacturer for UV or ultraviolet technology. AquiSense designs and builds disinfection products for UV LEDs. So our technology is used throughout the world in a lot of different companies. So names that you might recognize: Mitsubishi, Nestle, LK bottle fillers, and our technology is also installed on the International Space Station, which is pretty cool. We work with NASA and on other projects as well. So that's kind of our claim to fame. So in this presentation, we're going to be reviewing UV technology, how it can benefit the world in terms of health and the environment. We'll be talking about how we typically get clean water in the US, what UV light does, and what UV LEDs can do. So to start off, we'll be talking about centralized water treatment, which is how we typically get water in the US. It's a treatment plant that is typically a couple miles away that treats the whole region around you. So I live in Bellevue, Kentucky. The water treatment plant that services me is in Fort Thomas, a couple miles away, and that water comes from the Ohio River, goes to the plant, is treated, and then is piped down into my house where I can turn on my tap and drink the water. There are three throughout the entire northern Kentucky area, and they service all the buildings and residents in this area. Those water mains can get kind of gross if they are left without any maintenance done for decades. Then the insides can get a little gross. But typically, um, in the US, we're fairly happy with our water. The fact that we can turn on a tap, drink the water, and it's clean, we don't have any issues. It's typically not even a second thought. We don't really have to think about it, which is not a problem for most people. So there's not really a whole lot of uh, interest in improving that. If it's not broke, don't fix it. But we need to remember that most people outside of the US and other developed countries don't have access to clean water. Most people do not have that luxury of turning on a tap and being able to drink that water. And so that's what we're going to be talking about. So to continue a little bit more on plant water treatment, the water treatment plants that we have typically use chemicals or chlorine for disinfection. Chlorine has been used for a long time. It has a long history and is actually very effective at killing pathogens or bacteria. It has saved countless lives. It has a residual effect, meaning the chlorine is added to the water and stays in the water to kill any bacteria that might be growing in the pipes before it gets to you. Now, when you do chemical treatment, you need to balance it out so that you don't add too much to cause harm to the people drinking the water or the local environment as well. So balancing that can be an issue, but again, for the most part, we typically don't have an issue with this. There are all other concerns. So disinfection byproducts is when a chemical interacts with some organics in the water, and it actually produces a secondary thing that can be toxic and harmful. Um, this is pretty complicated, and we're not really going to touch on that. There's inorganics and organics. Again, it's complicated. We're just going to move on, but it's a thing. So now we'll move on to UV light. So what is UV light? So it's a wavelength that sits in between visible light and X-rays. Typically, UV light is thought of as like the sun. So there's UVA and there's UVB. Those both pass through the atmosphere, and that's where we get wrinkles. That's where we get sunburns if we're out in the sun too long. There's UVC as well, but that's actually blocked in our stratosphere. So we don't get it here on the surface as much or at all. With UVC lamps, you can actually produce those same wavelengths, and it's used for disinfection. So what's going on with UVC light? Because of how strong it is and harmful it is, it can penetrate through the cell wall and actually break the DNA. And that's how it disinfects. So a photon from UVC light passes through cells of bacteria, pathogens, viruses, and human skin and eyes, goes through the cell wall and actually breaks the DNA. So what that does is it kills that cell microbiologically, meaning that it can't replicate anymore. So, from a bacteria point of view, it is dead. It can't replicate, it can't grow. So, that's how UV light works in our benefit to disinfect. The problems with conventional UV lamps is that they contain mercury, which is a harmful material. They typically are left on 24/7. This is due to their on-off cycle. You can only turn it on and off so many times per day. So they actually use a lot of energy because people just turn them on and leave them on, even if they're not being used. They're also very fragile, so they can be broken fairly easy, and they can spill the mercury into the water that's being treated or there locally, which can be an issue. So that brings us on to UV LEDs. Now, this is kind of a little bit more complicated. So what I'm going to do is use an analogy to kind of talk about everything that we've talked about in terms of UV LEDs. So I'm going to use the analogy of computers, the history of computers and kind of how they've worked so far. So the very first computers were these big things that took up entire rooms, and typically they operated from an organization point of view. So a university would have one computer, and anyone who needed to do any computations or calculations would go to that computer from the entire university and do their work there. Or a government or a large corporation would have a single computer to do everything that they needed to do. So it was this big one whole room computer that one organization had. And that was similar to the centralized idea of water treatment plants. It's one thing that services a larger group of people. Conventional UV lamps is akin to home computers. When those first started coming out, people started getting access to the internet, more information, games, entertainment, and those were a little bit more localized to a family unit. So one family would have one computer and you could get access to it. So that would be like conventional UV. That's typically installed in a single building, kind of in a basement or where the water kind of comes in, and it treats the water for that local group. UV LEDs are a little bit more like cell phones. They're very personalized, they're very localized. So the LEDs in smartphones actually allowed for smartphones to exist. Before visible white LEDs existed, smartphones wouldn't have been possible. So the LEDs, the visible LEDs, allowed for smartphones to happen. So that same analogy can happen with UV LEDs. So the same thing with localized disinfection can happen with UV LEDs. So we're just now starting to see how that takes place, and we'll talk about that a little bit further. The benefits of UV LEDs, they're environmentally friendly. They can run on solar and wind power. They cost less to operate, meaning that the lifetime of them can actually be fairly cheap. They're easily installed and replaced, similar to like a light bulb. And most of the time they can be recyclable. There's no harmful materials in them, so you can recycle them. So my company uses UV LEDs in our products. So we have the PearlAqua, which is a water treatment system, and it uses UV LEDs inside to disinfect the water. So this system is easy to use. It is easily integrated into existing products. So that would be sinks, water fountains, bottle fillers, refrigerators. It can be installed directly at the point of use so that it can disinfect the water right when it's being used. And we talked a little bit about residual disinfection, so that kind of coincides with that. That disinfection can happen right at the point of use, which has never really been possible before. So this also offers sustainable solutions for drinking water. It can, as we mentioned, decentralize water treatment, and it allows people to get access to clean water. It allows people to take control over how they consume water. And this is what we were talking at the beginning. So this technology provides a solution for people who don't currently have clean water, and it allows them to treat their water the way they need to, where it's not centralized. You're not expecting a government to do it because a lot of those governments don't have the resources to do that. It allows the people to take control of their own water. Um, so I, I understand that this, it's supposed to be a sales presentation for people to buy a product. This product isn't really made for people to go buy and put in their house because most people are happy with their water in the US. So this call to action is more about if you know any large corporations that want more treatment, want cleaner water, we work with nonprofits as well in remote communities who need access to clean water so that they can take control of how they consume water. If you know of any organizations who might be interested in this technology, feel free to reach out to me. I answer this email address, so I'm happy to chat to see if you know of any resources, know of any companies or organizations that might be interested in this technology. Thank you. Bye.